Dr. Holck earned his BS degree in animal science from South Dakota State University and a DVM, a master's, and an MBA from Iowa State University. His 35-year veterinary career has included swine production medicine consulting and R&D, technical services and leadership roles in the biopharmaceutical industry. Dr. Holck currently provides technical and business consulting to 3 Iowa-based companies, and in December 2020, he began serving as the senior program coordinator for the U.S. SHIP program. So thank you for agreeing to talk to us today.
Well, thank you, Maria. Good. And thanks on behalf of the U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan for being able to share today. The title is How Can U.S. SHIP Help Advance Control and Elimination Efforts of Endemic Diseases? We're good. But I want to make sure that I point out Dr. Giovanni Trevisan and Dr. Roger Main, I think, is also here. We've got a good team that are working on this. So I'm just sharing the progress that we've made. Our focus initially has been on ASF and CSF and keeping that out of the U.S. So you'll see a lot of that in the background. But the point we want to get to today is, well, can this framework work for us in the U.S. to also help with elimination of domestic diseases? So when we look at U.S. SHIP, U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan, it's a collaboration of industry, meaning producers of all shapes and sizes, packers, so that's the industry, state and federal officials. And we have investigators that are from many of our institutions that have been named today already, including Iowa State, South Dakota State, University of Minnesota, Kansas State, and University of Illinois. Our initial funding for this program, which started less than 3 years ago, came from the USDA. And already in our second year, the National Pork Board joined in to help us with funding for some of our technical efforts. And I also want to recognize the National Pork Producers Council that is lobbying for this program to become an official codified USDA program. So U.S. SHIP, it's intended to be a national playbook of technical standards to provide a uniform approach to disease prevention, response, and recovery by the participating states. Now, I do want to mention, and I'll go into this in a little more detail, it's modeled after the NPIP, or National Poultry Improvement Plan. And so the National Poultry Improvement Plan is also a collaboration that we're modeling this after, but it started over 100 years ago at the state level. So our focus is on ASF and CSF. What we're intending to put together is a certification at the site level, so producer sites and packer sites that get certified in U.S. SHIP. And our focus right now with ASF and CSF is prevention and then the demonstration of freedom disease outside of control areas if we were to get an outbreak. So a little bit about NPIP, or National Poultry Improvement Plan. It's collaborative between industry, state, and federal partnership. It is a voluntary program, as will U.S. SHIP be. It's a voluntary program, but in the poultry industry, it involves almost the entire industry. Over 99% of the industry is involved. It's across all of their different industries, eggs, meat, including broilers and turkeys. And again, it's intended to demonstrate the freedom of disease, both trade and non-trade. So it initially was established for domestic diseases with NPIP. So what you have with NPIP is an officially recognized standard of health for both domestic diseases as well as those that impact international trade. An example from NPIP, which is really relevant for us with U.S. SHIP, is the high-path AI. And in that case, in 2015, when we experienced a high-path AI outbreak in the U.S., 60 different countries discontinued importing poultry from the U.S. The NPIP got together, worked on that program, worked collaboratively with the USDA trade, and this last 2 years, when we've arguably had a larger outbreak of high-path in 2022 and 2023, only 2 countries have discontinued importing poultry from the U.S. So you can see the potential impact that that could have for us in the U.S. with regard to ASF and CSF. Had the opportunity to present on U.S. SHIP at the same time. Dr. Bruce Stewart Brown was presenting on the poultry industry and NPIP at Pig-Ski this past winter. And this is a slide that I borrowed from Bruce. I know it's kind of small here, but NPIP started in 1935 at a national level, but you can see from this graph over here, which is Salmonella pylori, they actually started at the state level in the 20s, and then in the national level in 1935, and over the course of 30 years, basically eliminated Salmonella pylori, which was the base disease for the NPIP. Same thing with Mycoplasma, but this was in the 70s to the late 90s, and now most recently with Salmonella enteritidis in eggs. Now, the point made here is this is a 30-year process. This is a 30-year process. This one's shortened, but it's a 10-year process. So that's some of the success that they've shown in eliminating disease within the poultry industry using NPIP. For U.S. SHIP, we have 3 technical pillars. So those are biosecurity, traceability, and surveillance. We've been hearing a lot about biosecurity already today. We've heard some about surveillance. We're also working in the areas of traceability. You put those 3 technical pillars together, and that is the program that we're building in U.S. SHIP. And when we have all those in place, a producer and a packer will be certified again at the site level. It basically creates, in the case of an outbreak, a passport for them for movement between states and for our industry for international trade. This slide at the top half represents a control area. So if we were to get a foreign animal disease, specifically an ASF in this case, we have a lot of our programs and policies in place based upon the Red Book for what we're going to do inside of that control area with regard to depopulation and disposal and eventual cleanup of those sites. But the thing U.S. SHIP is here for is everywhere else. So U.S. SHIP is not meant to confuse what are we doing inside of a control area. U.S. SHIP is meant to say, let's demonstrate freedom of disease everywhere else. This is the timeline that we've had for our program, which is less than 3 years old. We started at the very end of 2020, and in that first year, we worked together collaboratively with the different investigators on putting together some of the initial technical content for biosecurity, traceability, and surveillance. We actually held our first, what we call House of Delegates, and Bill mentioned that earlier, House of Delegates, which is an opportunity for the states and the participants to come together and discuss, debate, and then eventually vote on, well, what are we going to have for standards within this program? We had our first one in August of 2021. We went right into our year 2 in which we started establishing what we call official state agencies, because this program is administered at the state level. We also continue to build out what is the technical program for biosecurity, traceability, and surveillance. And by then, the question with the initial pilot of, is this something the swine industry is interested in? The answer was already given. It was a yes. And so we started moving towards, well, what does this look like as a USDA codified program? This last year, we've continued to expand the number of states and open up enrollment, which has been very encouraging, and I'll show you that in a minute. But also continue to build out, well, what are we looking at? We've broken out biosecurity into some specific areas of site biosecurity and live haul sanitation and feed biosafety, all things that we've heard about today. And the USDA planning continues, and we just finished, just less than 2 weeks ago, our 3rd House of Delegates. And show of hands, I think we've got a few in the audience that were at our House of Delegates. So thank you for continuing to go to meeting after meeting. But if you want to catch any of them after the session, they'll be able to explain what they saw at this last House of Delegates. Our goal is by the end of next year for this program to be a codified USDA program. That's important because then we'll have the credibility with our trade partners with regard to what this certification program is and the opportunity for them to negotiate with trade. It'll also be important for our state animal health officials or state veterinarians with regard to movement within states and between states. So that's our timeline, fairly aggressive, but we have felt really encouraged by the participation in the industry. And speaking of that, when we first kicked this off in December of 2020, we were hoping to get 10 to 15 of the key swine states involved. And I'm happy to announce that we've got 33 states, which includes all of the major swine states. The swine population inside of those 33 states would be well north of 99.5% of the pigs in the U.S. So the states that have swine have already joined in. Those states in white, we hope to get on board over the course of the next couple of years. The enrollment is at the state level, and so we have set up what we call official state agencies enrollment, and I've got some brochures here we've got up at the table, but enrollment is fairly straightforward, and we try to keep it that way for producers. But basically filling out a form with the state. After completing that form, they also fill out a biosecurity survey, which I'll be sharing some of the results from that biosecurity survey at our breakout tomorrow afternoon. And then they pursue certification, and that certification means I'm certified for ASF, I'm certified for CSF. Obviously the potential, just like NPIP, is can we set up programs for certification for PED, for mycoplasma. This is the numbers of enrollment already in this program in its infancy, and we're at over 68% of the U.S. swine breeding herd is enrolled in U.S. ship, and over 61% of the growing pigs. So very encouraging very early in this program, and we hope to continue to grow those numbers so that we can achieve nearly universal adoption within the U.S. Again, lots of materials that we've got. We've got a website. We're trying to use the new technology with QR codes. A producer could go on that QR code, and if you can read that right now, that'll take you right to either the standards or just the general enrollment process. So working hard to get awareness in the industry. With regard to technical content, this has been driven by working groups, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But all of that content then comes to this House of Delegates. The House of Delegates that we had just a couple of weeks ago looked at in all three of those areas with regard to biosecurity, traceability, and surveillance. Question that comes up was, well, what are the current standards? So these would be the current standards just prior to the House of Delegates a week ago, but essentially, a producer must have a valid veterinary client-patient relationship with an accredited veterinarian. With regard to biosecurity, we have a general national standard of a minimum of 5 days downtime coming from an ASF or CSF positive country. With regard to feeding practices, which are being led by our colleagues at K-State, no swill or garbage feeding, and a temporary cessation of porcine ingredients in the case of an ASF or CSF incursion. We're also utilizing some of the tools that are already in the industry, so not recreating the wheel. The Secure Pork Supply Plan, which has been developed over the years, is now part of a standard for many of the sites in our program, and basically they need to have a completed Secure Pork Supply Plan and have that available to the state upon request. With regard to traceability, it's fairly simple and straightforward right now. Have your PIN, have the demographics of your site, and provide that to your official state agency. And they're also required to be able to show movement data of all movement in and out of that site for 30 days and share that electronically with their OSA. Surveillance testing at this point, there's no peacetime testing in addition to what's already in place by the USDA with their active ASF, CSF surveillance program. But we do not do any additional monitoring at this time, but we do have plans in place if we were to get an incursion for what the monitoring would look like down to the site level. So surveillance would be an area as you think ahead to potential PED or mycoplasma, for example. Well, those would be areas where we would have to add additional standards. So these are the working groups, and in a similar way to what we just heard in Manitoba, I mean, it's a working group. One has been focused on surveillance, and as I mentioned, there's an active ASF-CSF surveillance program that's been in place for several years. Upwards of tens of thousands of samples and assays are run every year that help us to ensure that we don't have ASF or CSF. So one of the standards that was approved for this year at the House of Delegates was to incorporate that program into our surveillance. Feed biosafety, there's work being done at K-State to continue to look at what would a verified importer look like in order to ensure that when we're bringing ingredients in from other countries that we're not bringing in other pathogens. Market hull sanitation is an area, it's been mentioned several times today, and that's work that's being done by a working group based out of Iowa State, just looking at, well, what other things can we be doing and what sort of standards can we put in place once we have the capacity that we need for truck wash. Site biosecurity, feral pig risk mitigation, that's a working group. You'll see some talks tomorrow afternoon in a breakout on feral pigs that we've looked at and said, well, that's a big risk, so what are we going to do? And the work that was done this past year was in collaboration with the Secure Pork Supply, and can we put more detail into the Secure Pork Supply, specifically to outside raised pigs. And then traceability. We could probably spend a day or two on traceability, but suffice it to say, it's a key issue for the industry. US SHIP is a voluntary program. What we're trying to put in place is some very specific and simple steps in a voluntary program to gather those key pieces of traceability. We're working in concert with the NPPC, which is working towards a longer-term mandatory traceability program. So we are working together on that, and we'll continue to put our program forth as voluntary, and at the same time making sure we're consistent with where the NPPC and the broader industry is going. And then finally, just a minute on the General Conference Committee. That's a GCC, and that's our governing board. So the first year or two, we had this pilot put together. We were trying to assess whether the industry had interest. There's certainly strong interest. And now we've established just this last House of Delegates and an elected board to govern our SHIP staff and help us as we transition to the USDA. And that governing board is 9 members and basically represents producers and some veterinarians that will help us as we continue to develop the program. So as I mentioned, we just had our 3rd annual US SHIP House of Delegates meeting. It was right up here in Minnesota, 33 states. There were 300 registrants for that particular meeting, and it was, as Bill Hollis described earlier this morning, it is a format where you can come in and put scientific information on the table. You have the producers there that need to understand, well, what is that and what am I willing to do? What is best for our industry? And literally the last morning of that meeting is a business meeting where we vote on future standards and future resolutions for the direction of the program. So very much a democratic process. I'll end on a couple slides here just on long term. Where might we go? And this is where we bring it all back together with, well, why is US SHIP at a PED session at the SDEC this morning? Well, we intend to be a USDA codified program. So the standards and the information from US SHIP will be in the Code of Federal Regulations. It will be formalized. We see that we will want to continue to move forward with industry engagement. We've got 33 states. We've got all of the major swine states. Now we need to add the rest. Our goal is to get over 90% of the industry certified in US SHIP, which will take us a few more years. And we need to have all of our major supply chains certified in US SHIP. By doing that, it will be recognized by our state animal health officials, or SAHOs, as a certified health program. and could potentially streamline some of the paperwork that they currently have in place with movement of animals. Key thing again for us, and now going back to ASF and CSF, is, well, it potentially has a big impact on our trade. But looking down the road, again, modeled after NPIP, this program, the framework with biosecurity, traceability, and surveillance, the framework is there to build in certification program for PED, put in a certification plan for mycoplasma, and eventually, when we're ready, try to tackle PRRS. I used a little different terms than Bill did, but we've got the tools or the immune control. That's going to be a key component. I called it science. Bill called it communication. I mean, we've got those great organizations already in place with AASV, National Pork Board, all of our universities working together. And now we've got with US SHIP basically a framework or a platform where we can bring all that together and together as an industry decide on where we're going to go. Initially with ASF and CSF, the potential now is with PED, mycoplasma, and even PRRS. So with that, Marie, I'll turn it back to you, but I just want to say thanks again to the USDA, National Pork Board, and NPPC for all of their support.
Thank you, Tyler. Do we have any immediate questions for Dr. Holck? Yes.
Sorry, Tyler, I can't help it. The 35% or so of production that are not involved. For this group, can you say, do you have a feel for how many of those are a hard no, or they just don't understand it? And then secondly, for those, have you had any hard no's? What's your encouragement for us to try and help them get to a yes, they will participate?
Yeah, good question, Bill. We really haven't had hard no's. With the state of the economy of our industry, with all of the other activities that go on for a producer, I would say there's not a hard no, it's just, well, when do I make it a priority, right? That's one. I would say that for the larger producers, those have been easier to know who they are and get in contact, even have face-to-face meetings to help bring the process along. We're now entering in a stage where we're going to need the states, the state pork associations, the veterinarians, and your clients to make that awareness through the broader industry now that we move into the middle and smaller producers. And then final comment I would make is at the House of Delegates just a week and a half ago, one of the resolutions was passed was to say, let's have a working group put together to specifically look at the show pig or exhibition segment of our market, of our industry. And so I think initially we spent a lot of energy putting some of the initial technical things together, getting the states involved, identifying those producers that we knew and getting them involved. Now, I think what you're alluding to is, well, now we need to spread the gospel to a lot more of the industry that may not even be aware of it. So I would say no hard no's, but a lot of maybe not even aware of the program, or I just need to make it a priority. Last comment on priority is I think by introducing the potential for it to be a benefit for domestic disease like PED, that might pique the attention of some of the producers that are going, I just haven't made it a priority, but well, now if you're talking about PED or mycoplasma, yeah, let's get it done.
Tyler, quick question in regard to just having agreement between all of the states on the requirements versus having individual state requirements. Is there a push or is there a plan to kind of have that happen? Because I kind of know leading up to this so far, it's been, maybe Minnesota says, okay, the vets can do the training, and then Iowa says, no, wait a minute, they be trained first, and then they can do the training. And so just getting that universal requirement first, I think would be really helpful, because that way people aren't, kind of feeling like they're stumbling, when you're getting out of the gate.
Yep, yep. Good points, Deb. I would say for U.S. ships specifically, for those standards, I mean, those are standards that then the states have to implement, right? And they choose the level of verification or validation. We're just now getting to the point where I think a few of our states are going to lead some collaborative conversations with their colleagues, meaning state veterinarians with state veterinarians, on what that looks like. And I would also say that for ship, I mean, we're staying fairly high level. Now, if you start talking about like the certified sampler program with who trains who, we're certainly encouraging and supporting that program, but that would be something that the pork board would actually work with. But I do see a movement with some of the leading state veterinarians to try to shore up how their colleagues are working with U.S. ship.